Howdy, class. Humanities 4 class. We're October now. Today's the 5th of October. Halloween's coming up. It's going to be weird in this pandemic times. Well, everybody be wearing masks at least. Hey, that's something. Anyway, what's the update where you are? It's getting a little cooler out there. It's supposed to have rain in a week or so. We'll see. It's not quite as hot. It's still smoky. They're getting the fires in hand up here a little bit under control. So that's always good news because autumn's on us. This is autumn. We're no longer in summer. And so we should be seeing some change. If there's any trees left, we'll see some color, some leaves change. If there's no trees, then we'll have to watch a Disney movie or something. Anyway, today, where are we? Coming off the weekend. Hope you enjoyed yourself, whatever it is your time is you do with your time. Hope you're not gathering in groups because the pandemic is still very much on and Reading's getting more cases every day. Anyway, I know you're young and you don't think you're vulnerable, but you are. Okay, today we're going to be talking about a movement that changed cinema. Now, there's some of the movies I've assigned changed cinema. Citizen Kane changed cinema. Charlie Chaplin, Buster Keaton, these people were the first masters of this new cinema. Now, cinema is not new anymore. We're in the 1950s. We're in the middle of the Cold War, folks, with Russia. World War II is over, but now we're in another war of sorts that they define it as the Cold War. We've got the atom bomb. Russia has the atom bomb, and we're constantly rattling our sabers at each other. We think communism is going to take over the world, and we see communists everywhere we look. In the next lecture, I'll be talking about the communist witch hunts that happened in this country in the 1950s, but not today. Today, I want to talk about something good that happened in the 1950s, but not today. Today, I want to talk about something good that happened in the 1950s. I mentioned last time we spoke to each other, we talked about film noir changing things. The veterans who were coming back, the actors, the writers, the directors, all wanted to do something more realistically, not so fantasy-based like most Hollywood films are. And they looked at the Italian neorealism, and it got inspired to do something tougher, not so fairy tale like most Hollywood movies are. No matter how great they are, most of them are sort of fantasies of how we'd like to see life, but how it rarely is. But that all changed after the war again. There was a theater group in New York, of course, that was coming about in the late 30s, and they were being supported by this endowment for the arts that was supporting theater in New York, and they supported this one theater group that, and a bunch of interesting, innovative people were part of this theater group. One of them was Elia Kazan, the director. Another one was Lee Strasberg, the famous acting guru. And then there were some actors in there too that went on to become very well-known post-World War II actors. People like Montgomery Clift and James Dean and Marlon Brando and Eva St. Marie and others, Paul Newman. And a little before that, John Garfield. But John died early of a heart attack before the new style of acting really started taking a hold in cinema. And that style was, they called it the method. And so I want to talk about these method actors today and how they changed everything, specifically three of them. I just named them: Marlon Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift. Yes, it's pretty male dominated. There were females, obviously. Even Marilyn Monroe studied at the Actors Theater and the Actors Workshop in New York City under Lee Strasberg. Strasberg was the guru of this sort of acting technique, as others who branched off from there. And the style of acting was different than what kind of acting was expected before. The old film stars like Clark Gable and Cary Grant and Gary Cooper, they were mostly sort of playing themselves. Humphrey Bogart, these are great actors, but they're mostly played the same part over and over and over again in all their movies. And they look good doing it. They said their lines and hit their marks, and they moved on. They didn't put a lot of emotional thought into it. Method acting changed all that. It was based on sensory perception and memory. So if you're playing a scene and you're supposed to be sad, you just don't act sad. You have to think of a sad event in your life that actually makes you sad. And, or same thing with happy. You can't just act happy. They think it's fake. It's not real. You have to think of something that made you happy, makes you happy, and you have to feel that emotion as you're playing your scene. Same thing with crying, same thing with rage and anger. You better be angry, and it better be real. And I'm going to make you guys watch a Lee Strasberg documentary. It's on YouTube. Some folks, it's a German. It's the only one I could find that's free to you. It's a German documentary, but 70% of it is in English, and the other part is in German. But I think you'll be able to figure it out. You'll see some people in interviews of people that are legendary. So Lee Strasberg was teaching this sort of what they call method. And a lot of people, straight Hollywood, rebelled against it. The old guard thought it was a bunch of pretentious crap. But other people saw something else deeper in it. These actors were going to an emotional place that no actors had ever gone before. Yes, there's been some great actors, 30s and 40s and the 20s, no doubt about it. But did they go to the emotional depths that the so-called method actors went to? Highly unlikely. It takes a toll to go to that place. Maybe you've been in a play. Maybe you want to be in a play. Maybe you want to be in a movie as an actor. It's hard to be always in your head with an emotion and then get it out for the stage or the camera. It could be in a way unhealthy because you become a victim of your emotions and you can't control your emotions. And in method acting, they don't want you to control your emotions. They want you to live them out loud in front of people. That gets a little hard. And so usually what happens as the years go by, you kind of learn how to handle these emotions and bring them up as a craft, and then it becomes a craft. You're not literally breaking down each time you have to do an emotion about, say, loss. You could tap into this memory of this emotion, and then it becomes craft. And all these actors I mentioned turned it into a craft. Meaning, if you're supposed to be drunk in a scene, well, these actors would chug some booze right before the scene to get drunk. Well, okay, but once you're so drunk, then you become useless and you have to go home. And so it doesn't work. And so you've got to learn how to behave drunk without actually being drunk. And you know the key to that is, don't you, folks? Just like when you're getting stopped by the cops and you know you've been drinking, you try to act sober. Nobody acts drunk except for in bad movies when they're staggering and slurring their words, unless you're at a private party. When you're out in public, you try your best to act sober, even though for the most part you're not getting away with it. So when you're told to act drunk, be drunk in a scene, a movie or a play, you should do everything in your power not to play like you're drunk. You should try to be completely, utterly sober. But of course, it's impossible because you're affected by alcohol. And that should show through in your character. Well, that's what method acting is all about. Getting drunk on the set only works a couple times, and then you're too sick to work or you're too drunk to work. And then you're wasting everybody's time and money. And all these actors did it. Brando, Montgomery Clift, Dennis Hopper, James Dean, they all got drunk. It didn't work. Then they learned how to remember what it's like to be drunk and use that sense memory to bring up those emotions of being drunk. So this revolution was happening, and it just started to hit movies. At first, it was relegated to theater. These actors were acting in plays in the late 40s, early 50s, like Marlon Brando was in Streetcar Named Desire by the great Tennessee Williams, and James Dean was doing theater and live television. Montgomery Clift had been doing theater since the 40s, and they were getting noticed for their different portrayals of the hero. They were taking the typical male hero and they were making him really vulnerable and exposed, not so male and macho and hidden. They weren't afraid to show their feminine side of the male emotion. That looks great, but a lot of people were taken back by it because they didn't think it was manly to show your emotions. Hide your emotions no matter what. And leave the emotions to women. Well, these guys were very much in touch with a lot of their emotions because they were sensitive artists. And they tapped into that sensitivity. And within a couple of movies, they changed cinema history. Marlon Brando with Streetcar Named Desire, and then with Viva Zapata, and then with The Great on the Waterfront. James Dean with East of Eden, Rebel Without a Cause. Montgomery Clift had done the Red River, believe it or not, with John Wayne. And John Wayne at first couldn't stand him because John Wayne's 6'4", Montgomery Clift was a small, little, short, kind of feminine man. And John Wayne goes, how can I have a fight scene with this guy when I'm so much bigger than he is? Well, they did the scene, and they did it great. Howard Hawks did a great job. And Montgomery Clift pulls it off. But at first, Wayne was turned off by his unmanliness. And then he did the Raintree County and many, many others. And then he had a tragic accident that happened in the late 50s, and his face got completely shattered, and he had a ton of plastic surgery done on his face, and he was kind of never the same after that. And then Montgomery Clift became severe alcoholic, pain pill abuser, and he was never the same after the accident. James Dean, maybe you've heard of him, maybe you've seen Rebel Without a Cause. Maybe you've heard of it, I hope. He was 24 years old. He got in a sports car, 1955, and he was going to go to a auto race on west coast of California, and he was killed in a horrible car wreck. And at 24 years old, his career stopped dead cold. And he'd only made 3 movies: Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant. 2 of his movies, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, were released after his death. Only 1 movie had been released before his death. My favorite of his 3, East of Eden. Now, this is before rock and roll, and rock and roll has a lot to do with this. There's a change in the country. Rock and roll is starting to come around, 1955 or so, but these guys were getting started a little earlier than that. Bill Haley in his Comments had the first rock and roll song, Rock Around the Clock, and then, of course, Elvis hit, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Everly Brothers. That all came later. So these first couple of movies, they don't have rock and roll soundtracks. They have regular, straight Hollywood orchestrated, old school soundtracks because rock wasn't in yet. It was starting to come around, but not yet. And so there was this rebellion in the country that was going on with the youth. These movies were definitely aimed at a newer generation of moviegoers that needed something they could relate to. It was hard for them to relate to Humphrey Bogart as a detective because he was a lot older than they were. And they're not detectives; they're students. Or it's hard it's hard. Everybody loved him, but it's still they don't see themselves up there. Same thing with Clark Gable, who was from Gone with the Wind, just this handsome icon. They loved him; he was loved, but they don't see themselves in Clark Gable or Gary Cooper, who was wonderful. Cary Grant, same thing. They look unattainable. All of a sudden, you see someone human like Marlon Brando, who wasn't classically beautiful, and he's mumbling. He's not wearing pretty clothes. He's kind of rough, definitely rough around the edges, and people didn't understand it. But the youth market did understand it, very much so. And so that's what changed everything. These trifecta of 3 male actors, for the most part, changed how the perception of what the new Hollywood was going to be about, which was going to be about realism. And this all goes hand in glove with the neo-realism I talked about last week. These filmmakers had seen these films. Nick Ray, who had directed Rebel Without a Cause, and Elia Kazan, who directed Streetcar Named Desire and On the Waterfront and Viva Zapata. They are very, very much influenced by these Italian films that appeared to be more naturalistic, more realistic, because they didn't have the ways and means of fancy Hollywood studios. And so their movies were very much influenced their style, the camera work, the realistic acting or naturalistic acting, had a great, profound effect on them. And these 3 actors literally had changed the landscape. To this very day, every actor out there still references Marlon Brando, still emphasizes James Dean as somebody that's an icon, somebody that they look up to, and somebody they're trying to emulate. There are some actors out there who still are copying James Dean. A good one would be James Franco. He actually played James Dean in a TV movie, but others also, Martin Sheen, Michael Parks, so many more were influenced by him. Dennis Hopper, who actually worked with James Dean on 2 movies when he was 18 years old. And muscular actors, when I say that, I mean emotionally muscular, like Let me just think. Russell Crowe would be one. Uh, Benicio del Toro, Clive Owen are very much in the Marlon Brando tradition. Montgomery Clift was more sensitive than these other two guys. He always had this ability to have people wanting to save him. In Brando's movies, he doesn't come off that way at all. Nobody needs to save Brando in The Wild One or Viva Zapata. He is his own savior. He doesn't need help. James Dean does need a little help, especially from Natalie Wood in Rebel Without a Cause or Elizabeth Taylor in Giant, but Montgomery Clift needed a lot of help. And women wanted to protect him. This is in the movies, folks, and in real life. And he projected that. And women wanted to save him somehow. Mostly what they were seeing, but we couldn't talk about it in those days, was that he was a closeted homosexual. But people working with him knew that, and they're drawn to him and his vulnerability. Dennis Hopper does a great analogy about these actors. He was working with these. He worked with all those actors. I don't think he did not work with Montgomery Clift, but he worked with James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, Giant. He worked with Marlon Brando in Apocalypse Now, one of my favorite all-time movies. And he never got to work with Montgomery Clift, but he knew him a bit personally. And he would say, Marlon Brando comes at you like this as an actor. He's coming at you. He's going to give you everything. He's not going to hold anything back. And James Dean is coming at you like this. He's coming at you, but he's open to suggestions, not to come at you full on. He needs you, but he's also self-reliant. And he said Montgomery Clift is like this. And he's like begging for help. He's going, it's like a plea. A prayer and a plea. And he said that was the difference in their three personalities on screen and their three acting styles. And I'm not doing Dennis's comparisons justice, but that's the gist of it. So all this came about through this changing post-war World War II paradigm shift in American culture. The music was changing. We're listening to Miles Davis and John Coltrane. Rock and roll starting to rear its head. The youth are trying to find something they can relate to. We're in a Cold War with Russia. We could be bombed. We could bomb them. There's some great literature being written by post-World War II writers like Jack Kerouac and Kurt Vonnegut, Norman Mailer, Jim Jones. And they're writing some of the best literature fiction of the 20th century and the mid-20th century, all coming out of World War II. Painters, Jackson Pollock, Willem de Kooning, or changing the landscape of abstract painting. Picasso was still painting up a storm. And he's well into his 60s, I think, during the 50s. He died at 90 and 70, so he was maybe even 70 in the 50s. I'd have to look that up, but he was still on fire. Painting was changing. Literature, music was changing. And then when rock and roll hit, everything changed yet again. But before we go into that big shift, on Wednesday, the next time I speak, I'm going to talk about the House on Un-American Activities. Very relevant to what's going on today, folks. When Congress suspected communism was taking over this country, and they suspected that Hollywood was part of it. And they went after Hollywood directors and actors and writers as suspected commies, and led by the infamous Senator McCarthy, and that went on for several years until it was all brought to an ugly end, and there was a blacklist, meaning they prevented people from working because supposedly they were communists. And they thought a great way for communism to spread throughout the country is to have these people making movies that were pro-communist. Never happened. It was all what they call a witch hunt. That's where our beloved leader gets that term. It was a witch hunt, and they're after Hollywood celebrities, big ones. And they brought a lot of them down. We'll be talking about that next. I'm going to show you a YouTube video on the method acting. Take a look at it. I will also post another part of that Canopy video that we've been watching, Story of Film. It's how things are changing in the 50s. Check out both of those next time I see you on Wednesday. I'll be signing the 4th essay. It will probably be on one of the movies of one of these guys, if I can find them. If I can't find them for free on Canopy or Video on Demand or YouTube, you're probably going to have to pay for it. Once again, I usually show these films in the class because I have copies on DVDs. I can't get these DVDs out to you guys, so you might have to pay again, $2.99. Sorry. But we're saving gas money by not going to the school. So I'm still grading papers. I just got done grading all the second essays on one class. I'm almost done with the other second essay. I'll be starting the Citizen Kane one this week. Have patience. I hope you're getting something out of this class, and keep the faith and keep watching movies, because like Jean-Luc Godard said, everything is cinema.